morning, everyone. This is Mortgage Pros 411. I'm Audrey Boissonou with my co-host Kevin Casey, and today we are joined by Scott Heisey. You know how we know that? Because he told me that all I had to remember was the drink. You know, the drink that all the kids drink. And I'm like, yeah, except for me, because I wasn't allowed to. So thank you for being here today, Scott Heisey. He is the VP of Title Operations for a large title company in there's a lot going on with title and escrow these days, and there are a lot of things that LOs need to be aware of. And so this is just a little rundown on all the crap people are up to on that side of things. So
I mean, there's some stuff going on in title these days.
I know. We thought it was the only segment that wasn't impacted by all the people who don't have enough regular business. And so, you know, when people don't have enough income, they do shady things, and sometimes they do them anyway, but regardless. So just for fun, just a reminder. So this week we have the Fed minutes coming out tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Remember that these are the Fed minutes from the 31st of January, though. So it's like 10,000 years since then. So that was 3 weeks ago, and they were trying to calm down the market. So it'll be interesting to see what they say, but they often move the market. So just be on the lookout and be aware that that's happening. We're also going to have the 20-year bond auction and mortgage apps, which we have mortgage apps every week. And then on Thursday, we have existing home sales. So we'll see how that's going. So let's dive into some of the things that are going on in your world, Scott. So, and again, when I say your world, it's all of our worlds, because title and escrow impacts all of us. So these are things that we should be looking for. So one of the things that is most top of mind for you, you said, was issues with trusts and probates. So help us understand what that looks like.
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me here. I'm blessed to be on this podcast, so thank you so much.
That's so kind. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so as I kind of told you pre-call here, pre-podcast, what I am running into is a lot of issues. And when I start to get repeated calls on a thing, it trends up, right? I'm watching a trend. As an underwriter or operations guy, I'm at the bottom of a funnel. So when I start to see a volume of things, I'm like, hey, we have a trend happening here. So I'll give you a little background on where this started happening from. If we go back to the baby boomer crowd, who did much better than the rest of us financially by buying homes at $11,000 that are now worth $2 million and things like that, they socked it away. So they have a lot of equitable cash, liquid real estate right there. Well, guess who didn't do as well as they did? Their children or their grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So now that they are well into their 80s, if not 90s, they become targets. And as I kind of mentioned before, and I do seminars all the time, here's the kicker, guys. If you have more than one child and you have a son or a daughter, make sure you put your daughter in charge of your estate, because statistically, it's your son who's going to try to take your money before your daughter, right? But now we have a third party who's actually coming in to compete with those two, and those are caregivers. So I'm seeing a lot of that stuff happening now as well, because children are absent from their elderly parents. So they hire somebody to take care of their parents, who's now taking that as an opportunity to manipulate the elder person and move that money over to their side of the fence and cut the children out. So this is something I'm seeing. I can give you a really dark example of something that just happened recently. And so here we go. I get a call from a real estate agent who says, can you insure this deal? That's automatically a red flag to me, because that tells me that it's already been rejected somewhere else. So in real time, on the phone with the real estate agent, I'm punching up that property. I'm looking at the chain of title. I see that the property is in San Jose, right? It was in an area code 95129. So if you ever want to Google that, that's an older neighborhood built in the late 1950s. And again, those properties now are really highly sought after because they're very well established, right? So here comes the kicker.
$2.something million values.
It was pushing about $3 million actually in this case. Free and clear. He bought it in 1962. And he was also, so based on that, I could tell how old the old owner was. Properties in a trust, good for him. So I asked for a copy of the trust and any amendments, which the agent had. Sends those over to me. I'm reading through the trust. I see that there's 2 children who are appointed as successor trustees and the only beneficiaries of the trust.
Okay.
So I'm Googling them at the same time I'm reading through the trust and talking to the real estate agent who then had a party there. Hang on, just hold them to the side for a second. I could see that the son and daughter were in Texas and Arizona, respectively. So they're out of state. I read the amendment to the trust. The amendment did one thing. It appointed a new successor trustee, eliminated the son and daughter, and it was a caregiver. And when I asked the question and say, you know what, I would be interested in this transaction, but the two children have to be involved. They have to bless the sale of the property, of which this new person who's assuming the role of successor trustee blew a gasket. Those are all red flags flying, right? So I was like, okay, well, if you can agree to these terms, we'll go forward. By the way, when I look up a property in several counties in the Bay Area, I can see which title companies have already rejected that deal.
Interesting.
I was number 4 on that list of title companies. So keep that in
Wow.
mind. It was rejected by 3 others before it came to me. All right. So since I did have contact information for the children, I did contact one of them who picked up the phone and said, hey, I don't know if you're aware, but your dad's property is being sold, of which she blew a gasket. And her and her brother had hired that caregiver, living caregiver, to take care of their elderly father. Who then took the opportunity to cash in on that $3 million windfall. All right. So I left it in their hands to go after. Audrey, I didn't tell you the punchline when we were on the phone, but here it comes. I looked up that transaction again just recently to see if they were able to get in there and manipulate and stop it. And they did not. And that transaction was actually insured in Southern California. That's another red flag. Went down to SoCal. That should have been a red flag for the title company down there as to a non-local transaction of highly suspicious nature running through their hands. And it sold for just south of $2 million cash. So what's going to happen there?
The heirs didn't get anything, I bet.
Not at that moment. Now, if they are smart, they may go after the title company and the separate escrow company, right? Who should have done more due diligence in this case. But unfortunately, guess what? That $2.9 million is gone.
Wow.
And so is that caregiver. So, and I hate to say, I'd like to tell you that this is a one-off event. This is just the most recent one that I've run into.
I was actively involved in a very similar case. I run a charity, and we were told by the estate attorney that the single woman in her 90s had left our charity. I want to say it was like 25 grand in her will. And then she asked that since we have, some interest in the estate, if we would also become the executor to estate. And there was no heirs. All the monies were given to different charities. There's no money going to anyone particular that I recall. And so we actually hired a caregiver to take care of this person. And sure enough, the caregiver had gone to the same attorney that had told us, hey, take care of the property, oversee this thing so nothing happens. She amended the will, that attorney, and made the caregiver one of the primary recipients of the heirs, the proceeds. However, we found out about it, thankfully, once she passed. And one of the things with a caregiver is it requires a special lien or deed. Has to be, I forget how they said it, but it almost has to be court approved in order for a caregiver to inherit a property. Because so much of this scam going on where the caregivers talk so-and-so into, let me take over the place. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll convince the person they're taking care of, oh, we're related, but how come you didn't leave me any money in your will? And they'll guilt them into leaving money in their will. And they think, yeah, I'm a distant cousin. Don't you know that, I'm related? And they don't know, and they just, they will sign over the property. So it's a real problem. In our particular case, we actually were able to, because we had hired a great attorney, and she charged the original attorney with malpractice. That's not something an attorney wants on their records, a malpractice lawsuit.
Right.
And because of that, we were able to get the case thrown out against the caregiver, and we were able to. For us, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. It was $25,000. Nice amount to get as a charity, but it wasn't make or break deal for us. But the other heirs of the charity, the other recipients, they benefited the most from it, even though we were the ones who hired the attorney and got it done. But we almost didn't do it because we're thinking it's like, well, this is going to cost us 10 grand to get 25. It was kind of how it boiled down to. And at that point, it was kind of worth it. Okay, we're still netting 15. The other charities ended up splitting the 10 grand with us in the end, but only because they got all the proceeds. If we had lost, the 10 grand was on us. So it's quite a problem. It's a real problem in certain nationalities. That the caregivers are suddenly people have heart attacks when they had a perfectly healthy heart in some cultures. Not going to go into which ones they are, but
gee, Kevin, why don't we just walk on that little minefield? Good job. So just quickly, it's funny, I pulled, I'm always poking around for different things to share with people. And while we're on the subject of elder abuse, they finally arrested there was a contractor near where I live, and he was he wasn't a contractor. He was going to seniors and telling them, hey, I'll do this work, collecting the money, not delivering. And so they got him, and he's being held on a $2 million warrant for burglary, theft, and elderly abuse. But there was a good list in here of things that you can share with your clients. If you want something to post on social media, if you want something to do as outreach so that you can be an asset to your people, there was a good list of, things to do: verify licenses and insurers and insurance, make sure they're actually contractors, get recommendations from other people, check with the state and county authorities to confirm that they are, the real deal. It goes on and on. So anyway, it's just an idea for you guys, because this is a big problem. And I mean, honestly, I'm glad I didn't eat breakfast this morning, because I am nauseated. This is just, it's so gross. It's just gross that people would do this to other people. It just, ugh, God.
It is. And like I said, I'm at the bottom of the funnel, so I'm seeing it much more often than you guys would, right?
Oh,
So
yeah, for sure.
Because of where I lie in the position of a transaction. So there are some things. I did see kind of a question come up there. And what's interesting about that is that, are there some things you can do? Well, yeah, so one, if you have a transaction and that property is in a trust, or somebody's using a power of attorney, you need to ask these questions. Who are you? How are you related to the owner of the property? And under what authority can you act? Right? These are kickers here, right? Because then they have to substantiate. If you ask those questions, then they become evasive or bail, then we're looking at potential fraud and forgery in that case. Now, part of the reason I bring that up is it's because I care. We all care about this, and we don't want it to happen. But my title policy, the title policies that all title companies issue, protect the buyer for some very basic things here that involve this. They protect the buyer from fraud and forgery, voidability of contract, and incapacity of the seller specifically, right? And all those things exist. So if they happen, like in that other transaction I told you about, guess what? Title company's on the hook. So then somebody has to pursue it. Right. So again, keep in mind, and the other part is that, if you're involved in a transaction and somebody's telling mom or dad, hey, don't worry about it, just sign it, and they're unsure of what's going on, that's an issue. In our world of doing things via internet, media, emails, things like that, right? We don't get to keep our thumb on the pulse of things anymore. So we're relying on mobile notaries to make certain determinations and report back to us. And of course, the mobile notaries are like, we're not doctors. We cannot evaluate capacity. So we have an impasse in those cases.
That's a humongous problem. And the mobile notaries are there to verify a signature. I they don't want to do anything else in my experience other than verify a signature, except for the ones who are like blah 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 way more than they should. I mean, we have one extreme of the next, right? Like I'm like, please shut up because you don't know what you're
I've
talking
had
about, or like something like this where it'd be really important for them to identify that there's an issue. So, ugh, good.
Well, think of it this
I've
way.
had a notary stop a transaction because the client was inebriated.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Well,
it is best if they're sober.
yeah, this is true. This did come up a few years back with the basically state notary association, where they were the state of California wanted to put that ownership on them, and they're like, we're not physicians, we can't do that. So their response was, well, great, we need a doctor's letter for everybody over 55 years of age.
55?
There you go.
Yeah, wow.
55.
So I keep my letter in my wallet just in case now. So I'm
Are
good.
you're joking, right?
No, that was an actual response, but I do not have a letter in my wallet.
Good God, 55. I don't even get me started. Okay, we have another comment here. With those types of title fraud with that type of title fraud going on, we're seeing more commercials for home title insurance. Do you
Mhm.
recommend this? And is it something that will actually protect someone?
So that's the home title lock that they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a security thing. That is really huge in other states. I would talk specifically about the Eastern Seaboard, where the title records could be a year and a half behind, right? So you can't dig up anything for a year and a half. What's that do? Leaves that door open for fraud and forgery. Keep in mind, on the East Coast, title transactions are done tabletop with closing attorneys, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's validated there, so that's good, right? But let's go back to the big hole in the title records being a year and a half in arrears. That leaves it wide open. Now let's jump over to California, or the Bay Area specifically. Each county in the Bay Area has kind of a different backlog. Santa Clara County might only be 2 or 3 days behind.
Right.
We can also many times check a county's public porthole to bring it even current, right? So we can be within a day. So we can thwart that. This is what we do in the checks and balances before closing. Alameda County, unfortunately, tends to be kind of the lagger in this case, where they could be full 30 or 45 days behind, but we still go in and read the records up, right? So, but what do we cover? Title insurance covers that. So we shore it up as much as we can. If we miss something or can't catch it, we're responsible for it for the most part. We look to cure it. Or if it's something the seller did, we can maybe get restitution from them. It just depends on the situation. So back to the title lock situation, I get that call mainly from the elderly. Let's talk it. The extreme baby boomers go into a panic mode. Oh my God, is this going to happen? When I have them on the phone, I literally run a chain of title for them and look at it and say, you're good. Don't worry about it. If you have any concerns, you can always call me. So, and by the way, anybody on this call, you can typically get that information from customer service at every title company, just for peace of mind. So keep that in mind. And again, Audrey and Kevin,
That's good to know.
if you guys want, you can give my email and my phone number out to anybody on this call. Absolutely.
We will, we're going to post it on the bathroom wall. It'll be perfect. So,
it's already there.
yeah. It is. Everybody has an insurance for something, and then how much, is it really worth it? I had somebody call me recently who thought their identity had been stolen, and it sounded like it probably had been. She was freaking out that someone was going to be able to take out, take out a loan on her house, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know what I mean? So I'm like, is there any way to protect against that? Like you're alerted if there's an escrow open, or if they're alerted if there is I don't know, like, what can we do?
That's what title lock would do, right?
I know, but how quickly?
That's a good question. I've never really looked into
Okay.
it. Tell you what, now you're prompting me to do some digging with that company. I will call them. But kind of back to your point, right? So most of that fraud and forgery type of stuff happens with non-owner occupied properties, right?
Right.
Vacation homes that are, say, let's use Tahoe for an example, right? Something up there that people use at Christmas time and maybe during the summer 4 or 5 times a year, but it sits vacant. Well, if somebody is discovering that and realizing that there's nobody watching the farm, they can go into the public records, do a check, then start to assume the identity of the owner at that point, right? Now, here's kind of the kicker on it. It is standard practice today that if we have a property that comes through us and it shows that the mailing address as opposed to the situs address on the property taxes, right? Property taxes will show 123 Main Street associated with that APN number as the property. Taxes are sent to a separate mailing address. We will mail a letter to that separate mailing address, which is hopefully their primary residence, saying, we have an open transaction. We're verifying you are selling your property. And every day we get hits on that in the state of California where people call up and say, I am not selling my property.
Wow.
So that's huge for, vacant homes. That's huge for bare land. Bare land in particular is a super easy hit. Why? Because nobody's really looking at it. And a scammer can get, let's say, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 pretty quick. In particular, if they're manipulating and they get a buyer on the line, they're acting as a seller, they get a buyer on the line, and they already have a hard money lender to help that buyer take that property, because you generally are not going to get like B of A or Wells Fargo to finance on that unless it's construction loan.
Right.
But they set it up and they make it so palatable for a potential buyer to come in that they get that money right off the bat, and then they disappear.
They disappear.
You said
There's
another
move
thing.
too. I was going to say there's another area now I've heard is large commercial buildings like skyscrapers and such, and because the contact person is a company, and so sometimes the letter doesn't get opened, or no one picks up saying, hey, I've just sold the Bank of America building in downtown San Francisco at 555 California Street. If the managing company that manages the whole building doesn't get the letter, or it's sitting on someone's desk, I've heard stories of guys, selling these buildings, not particularly 555 California Street, but
Thanks for clarifying.
yeah.
Okay,
I don't
so
know.
Scott,
Have you heard of those?
Scott, just know that when you're addressing everyone, people are listening. We have listeners across the country.
Okay.
And so don't worry about, it doesn't have to be specific to
Thank you.
California.
I appreciate that.
I should have told you that before.
That's okay. So Kevin, kind of back to your point, I haven't heard of that specifically, but guess what? It's just a kind of ramp of the same model that I just told you about, right? Basically exploiting the holes in a system to then move money and move real estate in a fraudulent manner. Right. So that's why us on this end have to do a lot more due diligence, right? So in residential real estate transactions, in these cases, I'm asking for copies of photo ID to know that these people are who they say they are, right? Audrey kind of brought it up in our conversation earlier that, hey, that can be fake too. It absolutely can be faked, right? We cannot stop everybody from doing it. So if they're going to go to those depths of creating fake IDs, it better be for a large amount of money. Otherwise, it's not worth it to them, right? If they're only making 10, 20 grand, they're not going to go to that thing. But if they're going to go after big money, we actually look harder at that. We may even say, you got to be in our office to sign up. So, again, if they are super criminals, we may not catch them all the first time. The second time, they won't get away with it.
You had mentioned that for sale by owners are another place where you scrutinize a little more closely.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if they are not using the recognized system, so to speak, I tend to hold
MLS. Yep.
Yeah, I tend to hold up a red flag on that, right? Again, validating who they are. The other part of it is that for sales by owners always give me indigestion because they take a lot more hand-holding to get through a transaction.
For all of us, Scott, for all of us.
There you go. So, and again, they're Googling things and going, well, why get a real estate agent? You can do it yourself and save a lot of money. But you cost us all a lot of grief. And there are times that we go, you have failed so miserably, I cannot insure this transaction.
Yeah.
So Scott, while we're speaking of flipping, why don't you share with everyone the situation with the guy who bought the place to flip and thought he could do everything in himself?
Yeah. So it's very interesting is that, and this kind of comes through in waves, Audrey, that folks, and again, they watch HGTV, or they see the husband and wife that are flipping properties, and it's cute and it's glib and it's all these things. And of course, they give you that impression that everybody can do it, right? They're
Right.
also probably in Alabama and Tennessee where, their investment's 50 grand to get into something. So in this case that you're talking about is that this guy decided he was going to flip a house, had never done it before, had a few extra bucks type of thing. So he buys a home, decides to gut the entire, home down to the studs, moved walls, rearranged the kitchen, the bathroom, everything, right? And he was not a general contractor. He just went to and from Home Depot and watched videos online on how to do electricity, how to do plumbing, how to do tile.
He didn't pull permits.
None whatsoever. All of his subcontractors were the guys from the parking lot at Home Depot.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Those
But
are guys.
the problem with this is he didn't know what he didn't know. He didn't pull permits because he didn't know he had to pull permits, right? So he had not a clue. And of course, none of it was disclosed. So when the transaction came to me to underwrite, as a matter of practice, I always Google the property and look at the listing. And I read the description, and it said, this house is so new, the paint's still wet, down to the studs. It had pictures. It all looked great. But back to your point, no permits. So we don't know if any of this was to code.
Right.
So, of course, everybody blew a gasket that I was killing the deal. And I got the buyers and sellers on the phone along with their respective agents and went through the nuts and bolts of why it is the way it is. And of course, our title policy covers the buyer for unpermitted work. Right. So I'm like, hey, you got to disclose this. And of course, this guy who's selling was absolutely naive. He wasn't evasive. He literally gave us everything that he did, but he didn't know what he didn't know. So this really falls back to the real estate agents to go, wow, this thing, here's your kicker, guys. If somebody is selling their house and they come in and say, look at all this stuff I did. It's beautiful. I moved this. I did this. They're bragging about their work because they're proud of it. That's a red flag. And you got to tell us.
Well, and again, the fact that the realtors didn't even think to ask for things like, anything.
Well, they don't know what they don't know, right? So that's why I'm out there trying to educate.
Yeah, but in that case, I mean, we should know these things.
Well, this is true. And by the way, remaining silent and hoping nobody catches it may be an action or attack. Like, okay, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and not raise any red flags. Well, if it's known, and we've run into this before, I'll get a really quick example of that. There was a lot line issue, fence line issue on a transaction I did where the buyer called me up and said, hey, I'm standing in my backyard and I have my map in front of me and my fence does not match the map. And I went, okay. So of course we made contact with the neighbor where the fence was moved over considerably. He lost about 80 linear feet of his backyard to accommodate this guy's shed in the back. And it was a substantial area. And as it turned out, the neighbor next door to our insured said, oh yeah, both the buyer and seller agent were in the driveway talking about it and decided not to raise any red flags or tell anybody. So guess who got to foot that bill when it got through their broker? So think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I mean, and again, I think it's interesting and very important for everyone to note that the things that you're talking about are, like when you're Googling people, you're looking up sellers and buyers and the children of sellers, and you are, there are other things going on the back end that none of us know about, think about. If maybe you'll squeak through, maybe you'll get something through, but assume you won't, and eventually it's going to bite you in the tail. And is it worth it? I mean, and again, like from a real estate perspective, I mean, we've talked about this. I have a real estate license, but I don't do my own transactions because I don't do them every day. And there is a perception that I should know certain things because I have a license, right? So I'm baffled by the idea that these people are just, well, again, people they want the deal. They'll do anything to get the deal. They want to get paid, et cetera, et cetera. But again, there are risks around all of that.
You hit it on the head. It's really what forces your decision-making process is many times your pocketbook, right? Mm-hmm. And if If it's, I say something and lose this deal, I don't get paid, it's going to be a really rough month, right? You see where I'm going with this. And that's
Yeah.
human nature. And I understand that, but it's really, if a problem is brought to me, it doesn't kill the deal. It just starts conversation as to how do we work within the parameters of this to fix it. So communication's key here, right? I really pride myself on finding ways to close transaction, not kill them. Right. So that's really where it is.
Right. Me too. I mean, how can I get this deal done, but do it the right way?
There you go.
That's the trick.
I
It's
had a
not that you
similar
want the deal
situation.
to die. You don't, nobody does. But what were you going to say, Kevin?
I'd say I had a similar situation with the lot line with the neighbor where, you know, I have a creek between my house and the other house. And it was never quite clear exactly where the property line was with the creek. And then right before my neighbor sold his house, he built up a fence, but the fence went across where I thought was, you know, I think that's on my side of the property, not on his side of the property. And so my solution was I wrote him an email, but I copied his real estate agent and broker on the transaction. And boy, did that get fixed so fast. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'll give you, you know, it's funny, and I'll just comment on that situation with a creek. So any legal description that ties to any natural source, being a creek as a boundary line or a tree as a boundary line, is really not a good legal description. Why? No. Because trees grow and die, and then they're not there anymore. Or more importantly, you just hit it, right? One bad winter, that creek is not where it used to be. And there may be a winner on one side of that creek and a loser on the other side of that creek. So these are things that really should be established.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, so you mentioned that transfer on death deeds are a real problem. Can you explain what that even means?
Yeah. So this is specific to California, by the way, right? Okay. So it was transfer on death deed was created for all the best intentions, right? It was really, if you sat down and thought logically, that made sense. If you have one property and maybe one heir, right? So you are the surviving spouse and you have one child. It was set up to avoid probate so you could transfer your property to your child, right? Without having to go through probate, right? Because probate's expensive, or setting up a trust. A trust can be very expensive, but you only have one asset. Do you need to go through that whole process? Well, no. And that was the intention of it. But it really came to fruition beginning in January of 2016, I believe. And it was going to run 5 years before they said, okay, it either becomes a law or we abolish it or we change it type thing. Well, from 2016 to 2021, they found all sorts of holes in it. Well, what happened between 2016 and 2021? COVID, right? So here's the kicker, you know, elderly people who are now in the hospital, right? Their death may be imminent. And what do their kids do? Again, the logical thing is, oh my God, does mom or dad have a will? We don't know. They Google it and they find transfer on death deed, the get out of jail free card, you know, that cure all your woes. And they have mom and or dad execute this transfer on death deed while on their deathbed. And then they die and, you know, nature starts to take its course, right? So here we go, 6-8 months later, they're now trying to sell the property through this transfer on death deed. And we have to go, time out. We have to validate the capacity of the person who signed this because they signed it on a Monday and died Monday night or Tuesday, right? That is absolutely invalid. The other part of it is that, so Audrey, I'm going to use you as the catalyst here. It's your property. You execute this thing, right? You give it to Kevin. Now, Kevin can be your son, your spouse, could be a cousin. It's an heir, right? The problem is that via that deed, this is a deed, looks like my hand, we don't know if that's the person who should have gotten it, or were there others who expected to inherit the property. Mm-hmm. So if we were to accept that transfer on death deed as gospel, and then we have 4 other people show up who were actually your children, going, time out, this didn't work. And by the way, it's absolutely attackable. Why? You died in a hospital. You're hooked up to machines. You're probably whacked out on drugs. Why a notary would even notarize you is beyond belief. But this is what I started to see. So I've only been able to close on maybe 20% of every transfer on death deed that's come across my desk.
Wow.
because they are done by DIY people who Google it and read the first 4 lines and become instant experts and go, this is my get out of jail free card. We can go forward from here. So think of that.
Wow.
By the way, estate planning attorneys hated this thing because it did take that process out of their hands. That generally needs to be for
Oh, you mean
perfect.
your probate fees that are kind of astronomical?
Well, that or even doing a trust. Now,
Yeah.
again, some of the ones that I have closed on were actually the ones that attorneys helped facilitate the transfer on death deed because somebody had cancer, right? And they had,
Yep.
let's say, 3 or 4 weeks to go, right? They went in there, they sat down, and the attorney goes, I do not have the time to set up your trust at this point. Let's do this. But to me, that ratifies the validity of that transfer on death deed. And I do call up the attorneys and I do talk to them specifically about certain cases, which has prompted me to actually reach out to the local bar associations for estate planners. And I did a presentation for them 3 weeks ago where I had 70 plus people on that call. After that call, my email and phone blew up with, oh my God, I think I messed this up. How do we fix title? Things like that. So can we rely on attorneys to do everything perfectly? And I hope there's no attorneys on this call, but not all the time, right? Everybody needs to double check and keep checks and balances in place to validate any deal.
No, I'm a huge advocate of getting my clients to get their trust done. I literally don't tell them, oh, you should do this. I tell them, you need to do this now. Here's the person to call, do it now. And I'm not moving forward till I hear back from them that you're moving forward on that trust.
Yeah.
Because
Kevin, I'm going to add to that too, and Audrey's already heard this, but if you are setting up a trust or know people who are setting up a trust and they have more than one child, be pragmatic about what you're doing, right? Don't pick the oldest one just because they're oldest one, right? So here's a couple of things, and I always say this when I do this in person. I say, hold up your hand if you have more than one child. And I say, which child do you love the most? And of course, everybody giggles at that because it's not fair. I said, which one do you like the best? And I have 3 boys. I do have a favorite out of the 3, right? It's just, it is what it is. He's a good guy, right? The other 2 are okay. So let's put it that way. But, but here's the kicker, guys, right? Pick the one that you trust the most. Or if you cannot trust any of them, pick a fiduciary, somebody separate who doesn't benefit from the trust, who will facilitate your wishes at that point. Because if you do the cardinal sin that the baby boomers did, which is I'm just going to select my oldest son to drive the bus, generally it breaks apart.
Yeah, no, it's people pick the wrong trustees a lot of times. And
All the time.
All the time. And it's funny what they will pick for why, they pick someone who's good at money, which would make sense in most cases. But it's not just someone who's good with money and is trustable. It's also someone is capable of pulling off a very complicated transaction. I was the trustee for my parents' estate. And there's things that you really need a lot of advice on from professionals when you're the trustee. You need a good CPA that's telling you what documents have to file as a trustee, because you have to set a whole new set of tax returns. There's other disclosures that you have to disclose out. And then there's, breaking it down and how you handle, like I was just talking to someone over the weekend, and father had passed away and mother had passed away a year earlier. And there's like, I don't know what happened to all their stuff. Just my brothers and sisters came in because I'm not on the East Coast and everyone else was there, and everything was gone by the time I showed up. And it's like, that's just, you have to have someone that's doing stuff right.
It's sort of like homeowners association boards. You might be on the board, but that doesn't mean that you're qualified to be on the board.
Nope.
So, I mean, the fact that we just let just any old person, it's crazy.
Well, Audrey, let me just say one last thing. That I've caught this from audiences. They're like, well, I'm dead. What do I care what happens? I think that's kind of funny, right? Because it's a bit glib. You go, you know what? If you really want to go out with a bang, you leave it in a mess for everybody to unwind, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, it is that people like you and me and others on this call are the ones taking that ball of yarn and trying to unwind it when people are in the midst of a conflict, right? So it's tough.
I dealt with an estate where the executor sole drive was just to get it all done as fast as possible, didn't want to deal with it. And so sold the house for, 20% less than it should have sold for, just because it was easier.
Yep.
I don't want to deal with it.
Yep. Easier, faster, whatever. Anyway, it makes me crazy. We have a question here. I see a company called Will and Trust advertised a lot. What's your experience with DIY trust?
Well,
DIY trust.
Yeah, it's funny is that so there's Nolo Press that we really deal with a lot, right? Where you can get legal forms and things like that, which is pretty good. It can walk you through it, but it's really not blessed by attorneys by and large. I did hear through the grapevine that the guy who created Nolo Press, his estate is an absolute mess. He passed away, and that I know some people who are doing that it's just destroyed. So, keep that in mind. But okay, so let's validate this a little bit, Audrey. That let's say you have one home and you've got 3 children and you want to just, do it your trust yourself. Fantastic. I think you can get away with that if you're pretty smart. Kind of go through check those boxes, but not good for somebody who owns multiple, real estate holdings, several cars, things that are antiques or collectibles. Art, all this stuff would be really, really tough to kind of wrap your arms around. And I think you need a really good attorney to handle that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm dealing with a trust right now with a family member, and there was a particular life insurance policy that wasn't included in the trust, and it is causing all sorts of problems right now. So, like you wouldn't even think that that would be an issue, or they didn't think that they needed to include it. And as it turns out, they should have, but who knows, right? And they used an attorney. So, yeah.
Again, attorneys are human, right? They make mistakes.
Yeah.
Or they can only deal with what is disclosed to them. And if that was forgotten for whatever reason, they knew nothing about it. That's why many trusts or probates will contain what we formally refer to as an omnibus clause, where it said anything discovered after this point will be distributed in like manner, right? Saying that if you had 3 children, everybody gets a third. If we find that life insurance policy, it's going to follow the plan we laid out.
Yeah. Well, and
That's a great point.
there's a comment here, and they're asking, wouldn't things that aren't included, wouldn't it cover things that aren't? And in this particular case, the problem is on the side of the insurance company. They're requiring documents that don't exist, or they're asking for documents that don't exist. So anyway, it's just, it's amazing what a mess you can have even when you are trying to do things correctly.
Well, and the other one too, and there's some counties, I happen to, work in one of them, and they don't acknowledge a pour over thing that everything that's not in the trust belongs in the trust.
Right.
In the city of San Francisco, if you die out of trust, too bad, they want their probate tax or their
right.
Yeah, it's
right. So we have okay, so there's a few other things I want to get to before we're done, and we have a few other questions, but we'll come back to that. So first of all, just quickly, let's cover wire fraud, just because it's been something that we've been talking about literally for years now, and what's going on with the hackers now and how, what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, so a great question. And again, I'm not an expert on the wire fraud subject, but most of that wire fraud is being the success in wire fraud is being perpetrated by the consumer's emails, right? The buyers, the sellers, anybody involved in the transaction, and also the real estate agents. Back to what you mentioned earlier, they're not using secure emails. So these are easily hacked, right? And then the emails that the scammers are using are so close, right? You can't tell. There's just one letter off here and there. And of course, if you're not paying attention, then they're in the system. And of course, every title company has been hit with this. They try to catch them all. But generally, it doesn't come from the title company itself. It's from an outsider then opening up that pathway. Right. And then the other part, and I mentioned this, that a few major, worldwide title insurance companies, very large companies, have recently been hit with like a ransomware where the hackers got into the system, shut down their operating system, then said, okay, for the price of, X amount of dollars, we will release this type of thing. So they've gone from the wire fraud thing to just hitting it at a different level. So this is the evolution of hacking at its, at its finest. So, So, agents, real estate agents, title companies, consumers absolutely have to be super diligent here and do not accept anything that says, hey, our wire instructions have changed, because they will not change
Right.
ever. So
Well,
you have to
and
keep in mind.
to your point, you were saying that, like other title companies have been hit, but nobody's sitting around thinking, oh, we're golden, we're good.
No way.
Didn't happen
Yeah.
to us. Same thing with mortgage companies. There have been a bunch of mortgage companies that have been hit, but you're not gloating going, well, it wasn't me, because it could be anyone. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
so we talk about this pretty regularly, that you need to really be doing everything you can to make sure that your systems are as secure as possible. I mean, I'm literally putting it in the body of emails now, not in my signature line, which no one reads, not, I say it to them verbally multiple times, and then I'll put it in the email. Do not send me anything in email that has any personal information on it. Make sure you use the secure portal to upload it,
Yeah.
etc. And so, and then Kevin and I were on a call with a bunch of realtors, and they're like, well, is that portal, is it free? And I'm like, do not chintz on this, for God's sake. Like, if you're going to spend money on anything in your business, make sure it's security, because we've also heard from our regulators when we've had them on here, that when there is a breach, that they scrutinize those companies more closely when they're doing their audits. And
Mhm.
so there are so many ways for this to burn you in the uh tail. There you go. So anyway, oh God. Anyway, so yeah, so again, we cannot say this enough times. I don't care if you get tired of hearing it. Excuse me. It is really, really important that we are doing everything possible to and text too. Same thing with text. How many of our clients take pictures of stuff and text it to us, for God's sake? I'm like, okay,
Yeah, I know.
first
I
of
was
all,
giving an example the other day where someone sent me a text, and I had my AirPods on, and Siri read the description of the photo into my ear with the text. So if Siri knows what's in the photo, everybody can know what's in the photo.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a funny comment on that, and it's absolutely true. My wife and I were having an argument one time as we were walking out to the car to go somewhere, and of course she took in that last shot at me, right? And all I said was, "Oh my God!" And Siri popped in. I know, right? And so
okay, so we have a question here. Do you offer policies on auction properties, or do you require a waiting period?
yeah, that's a great question. I would say we would have to certainly wait the waiting period. But here's the question back to that person, is that, are you planning on selling it? Because most auction properties people grab and they don't hold on forever. They might rehab it and flip it, or they may throw a renter in there. So, as long as that auction was sound, right? Do you really feel that you need to buy a title policy at the current appraised rate of that property, right? So that would be kind of the question to go back. Do you need to spend this extra, I don't know, whatever it is, let's call it $3,000, right? On that property, in particular, if you're going to sell it within the next 12 months, I would say no, right? I go, it's just not worth it. Now, if you're going to keep it, or if you're going to move into it, then let's talk about that. Yeah, but the waiting period has to kind of run its course there, so there's no attack back on title. So we don't want to insure it up front. We want to make sure the time span goes out, so there's nobody coming back in, or the person who was foreclosed out doesn't go, hey, I filed bankruptcy. We're going to overturn that foreclosure and unwind it back. So we're going to look for a little time break in there before we go down that path. But if you have something specific, you're welcome to call me and we can talk about it kind of offline.
Got it. Okay, so we we're this hour goes fast. We always run out of content before we run out of time, or we run out of time before content. So anyway, there is a new ADU law that I want to get into. And also, so can you just briefly let people know what's possible out there and what you're dealing with on your end,
All
and
right.
what we have to look forward to?
There you go. So there was two in California. There was two recent ADU laws, right? So the first one was to streamline and fast track the process of actually creating an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, right? Where if you have a property and you can support a studio or a 1 bedroom, 1 bath sort of unit on the property, then the state mandates that you can go through this process quickly, which forced the counties to kind of not narrow, but streamline their process as well, right? So this was all a part and parcel to we need more homes or affordable housing or places to rent. Well, the new modification to that is that, hey, guess what? Now, if you've created an ADU, you can sell that ADU to a buyer, right? The thing is that did anybody consider the domino effect from that, right? So if the lot's big enough, and this would be per the county as to being able to split it to facilitate 2 units, right? So it'd have to meet a certain square footage per county. That's fine. Then you go through that process, right? But then on top of that is access, right? So does an easement need to be created to get to and from that property? Now, let me give you the real flip side of this, which would probably be more important here, is that the ADUs on the property, it's in the backyard somewhere, right? And they come through the gate and they park on the street and they do what they're doing. Well, they're saying, hey, you can sell this as a condo, which means you have to convert it to a condo. The lot needs to become a common area, right? And you have to set up an HOA for maintenance, and still you need access easements. So can it be done? Yeah. Should the do-it-yourselfers do it? Absolutely not. No, right? Because there's so much involved with that, creating easements, exchanging of deeds, common area, setting that stuff up, filing of reports. So I think the nature of the law was to, hey, we're going to do this and it should be good for the economy and help people get into homes or smaller units. Fantastic. But now it's going to red tape into all these other things that as it goes through, we can benefit from as an industry as long as we're involved, right? And make sure it's right. Because if it's not, then it's going to be a whole slew of claims and it's going to be really hard to sell some of this stuff.
Hey, I had a question for you. It's we have moments here, might not have enough time for this one, but there's a guy who's telling me he buys properties that have clouded title, and then he has a process for clearing the clouds and going through it where, and I'm just curious, is there people that actually do buy properties that have clouded title and then
Sure.
the title?
Yeah, think of this, title insurance is like other insurances to a certain extent, right? You exchange money for possible risk.
Right.
So let's put it that way. Anybody here who's got a driver's license and a car has car insurance, and your insurance is predicated on your driving habits, right? That's right. So, and if you have bad driving habits, then your premium is very high. Title insurance doesn't work that way, but we still accept money in exchange for potential risk, mitigated risk. So let's go back to a cloud on title. A cloud on title is kind of an ambiguous term. It could be a huge cloud, like a rain cloud, or it could be a nice little fluffy one, right? Most of the properties in California, certainly all the ones I touch, that's the reason people call me, is to go, can we get through this cloud on title? Now, the most egregious or the ones that seem to happen the most are loans that were not reconveyed, and they're sitting back in the chain of title, and everybody's going, oh my God, I've got this thing, I don't owe that money. And no, you don't owe that money. That bank went out of business, right? In 2007, 8 through about 2013, how many lenders went belly up?
Belly up, and they didn't clear their titles.
There you go. We're never going to get recons on those, so we have to live with it. Those would technically be clouds on title. What's very interesting about it is that I still get calls many, many times from agents or whoever saying, oh my God, there's a deed of trust on there from 1972, right? And it was a carryback from the former seller to the new buyer, right? Because interest rates were at 18%. Right, type of thing. It was $10,000, so it was that sort of thing, and they flip out. I'm like, you know what? We'll insure right over the top of that. So back to the question: will we insure over clouds on title? Yes, provided that we can. Right, just depends on what the cloud is.
Okay.
Good
Are there
Lord.
things to watch out though for that?
Yeah, what's funny is that each one of you, when you're dealing with any title company, you're going to get a preliminary report, right? Preliminary is really the key there. It's not a final, it's a preliminary. So it's when it comes out, it's going to have stuff on there. And we need to work our way through that. Make sure you read the prelim. By the way, everybody here, when a prelim is issued, do not rely upon the escrow officer to check it out for you, right? Because they're dealing with multiple prelims, multiple clients. Read that prelim. If there's discrepancies on there or it doesn't make sense, then say something. Do not wait till the end. And so you got me on a soapbox for one last second here.
That's good.
I literally had a transaction where there was 4 sellers. They were all siblings. Each had 25%. Strangely enough, it was Tahoe property, right? So it was very highly valued. It was in the Truckee area, and it had been in the family for generations. So the last generation, each got 4 kids, got 25%. I got a call the day it was signed off. 3 sellers showed up to sign off. The escrow officer said, "Where's the 4th seller?" They go, "Oh, he's dead." Okay, now here comes the real kicker. This escrow was open for 4 months. They had 4 months to disclose that their brother died. You know when he died? 1996.
Wow.
And they never thought to bring it up as an issue? What were they thinking?
Well, guess who also didn't sign the sales contract? The dead guy, but nobody. See, so read the prelim, question what's going on. And I'm going to give you a thing. Let's go back to the cloud on titles comment there really quick. He was dead and he was entitled with his wife, husband and wife as joint tenants, right? So right of survivorship. So I'm like, fantastic. Where's the wife? Well, that happened to be his ex-wife. Right. He remarried, never changed title.
Oh.
So I got the ex-wife on the phone and the newer wife on the phone to talk about this. And we actually avoided probate. We cut the proceeds check, 25% to the ex-wife who is still entitled, who then endorsed it over to the newer wife, who then got that. They worked out the tax ramifications from that, but that took some conversations to make that happen.
Wow.
I had a really complicated one, something like that too, like during COVID, actually. Interesting. I'm having a flashback while we speak. I totally forgot. That is crazy. Yeah, somebody said, what a nice lady. That is really remarkable that the 2 were able to work it out. I mean, holy moly.
Yeah.
Yeah, good grief. Okay, so guys, there is just, again, we're going to run out of time. Bill Dallas is joining us next week. Don't forget that we have reports coming out the rest of the week. Make sure that you check us out on YouTube if you have missed any part of this or past sessions. And we had a million questions. The interaction today, Scott, is crazy. But again, what's really, I think the important takeaways are, first of all, read your prelims. We can't say that enough. Just like read your credit reports, read your appraisals, same sort of thing, right? So don't leave it to somebody else. And make sure that you're working with companies that have resources like Scott, who are going to jump in and aid you if something pops up in your transaction, because it happens, right? I mean, a fair amount. We all, if we really think about it, have stories that would make your toes curl. And especially with all the new ADU things that are happening, et cetera, it's not going to get easier. It's going to get more complicated. So just, Scott, what's your email address?
So it's scott.heisey. So it's SCOTT period HEISEY at Stewart.com, STEWART.com. And if you want to jot down my phone number, it's 408-489-5288.
Dirk wants to know if you can negotiate some similar thing between his ex-wife and his current wife. Are your servicers can we buy you? So anyway,
I appreciate that.
With that, I mean, there were so many things. If you guys if we didn't get your question,
my story about the title company that had to deal with the real estate agent that wrote down the wrong address on the purchase contract, and they closed on the wrong address.
That happens. I've heard of that happening. Yes. Or they pay off the wrong loan.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Anyway, we'll have you back again, Scott. Thank you so much for everything. Everyone have a great week. We'll see you next